Welcome and good afternoon. I'm Jason Gross, Executive Director for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. Good to join with you together today. Of course, we'd rather be in person, but so glad we have this opportunity to connect. I'm very pleased to be joined today by a number of participants from Illinois for this important discussion on America's role in the world in the midst of COVID-19 and why leading globally impacts us locally. This is an important conversation, and we're honored to have Congresswoman Cheri Bustos with us today. We'll welcome her to the Zoom in a moment. But first, a little bit about USGLC for those of you who are joining us for the first time, who we are. Last year, USGLC celebrated 25 years of building a better, safer world. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we've been constructing over the last 25 years. We're over 500 American businesses, humanitarian organizations, alongside our network of business, faith, military, and community leaders from all across the country. Our bipartisan National Advisory Council is chaired by Secretary Colin Powell and is made up of our nation's top security and foreign policy leaders, including most every living former Secretary of State. Our National Security Advisory Council is comprised of over 200 retired generals and flag officers. And our Veterans for Smart Power initiative is made up of 30,000 veterans from across the country who are committed to strengthening our non-military tools. And what brings us all together is a belief that America's role in the world matters to American families, and that a belief in strategic investments in development and diplomacy are essential to protecting our national security, advancing our economic interests, and projecting the best of America's values. We talk about why a tiny 1% of the overall federal budget, called the International Affairs budget, is one of the most cost-effective and powerful investments America makes. It's sometimes called the foreign aid budget, but it's so much more than that. It's our diplomats and embassies around the world, support for key allies, and programs that create jobs and open new markets. It's our response to humanitarian disasters, our work to battle the root causes of terrorism, and our efforts to tackle global health threats like Ebola and COVID-19, which has been that wake-up call that what happens overseas impacts us here at home. That 1% investment is effective, it's accountable, and it's transparent, and it delivers on behalf of the American people. We host forums like this with people all over the country, and we see that across political spectrums, state lines, Americans like you want to engage. For better or for worse, COVID-19 has really underscored the importance of this fight, and we are so fortunate to be joined by a true expert to help us think through all of this. I'm pleased right now to introduce our special guest, whom you all know well, Congresswoman Cheri Bustos. Congresswoman, so great to have you with us today.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go. You've been hard at work to address the challenges of COVID-19 over the past year and keep Illinois safe. You bring a wealth of experience from your work in Congress, from your time as a journalist to work in healthcare and now holding public office. Today in Congress, of course, the Congresswoman sits on the House Appropriations Committee and Agriculture Committee and has been a strong supporter of advancing America's global leadership through our civilian tools of development and diplomacy. First of all, let's start the conversation. How are you and your family doing today?
We are doing well. I just got back out to Washington, D.C. Yesterday. And as I told you just before we got on this, votes are not going to get in the way of this. We're not going to go over to the Capitol to vote until about 4 o'clock this afternoon. So I'm in good shape as far as spending a little time with you and really look forward to it.
Great for everyone to hear from you too, to have that uninterrupted time. We're thrilled about that. Before we dive into the discussion and your constituents can hear from you, I'd love to have you welcome to start with a few opening remarks as well to kick off our conversation today.
Sure. Well, Jason, again, thank you very much for the opportunity. It means a lot to me. If I may, I want to let you know a little bit about the district that I represent. It is the 17th district of Illinois, so I'm considered a downstater. I live in Moline. My front yard is the Mississippi River, just to give you an idea. The district is very rural. It's 14 counties altogether, 7,000 square miles. We have almost 10,000 family farms. On top of that, we have 9,600 labor households. So, really you've got family farmers, laborers, working people all together in this district. So it's very diverse from that perspective. People whose income is directly impacted by trade insecurity or jobs being moved overseas. I mean, I could share stories with you, like if you remember back in when Maytag moved over to Mexico, it has taken all of these years later for those wages in Knox County and Galesburg to make a comeback. Our producers who, they contribute so much to keep the supply chain going. You think about how important that is, especially during this pandemic and keeping food on our grocery store shelves. So you see a very local impact that global leadership. I'm gonna go to the name of what you're all about, but the very local impact that global leadership can have on our communities. The family farmers who, so many years of challenges, not just with the weather, but kind of the uncertain trade conditions that they've had to live through. That's my own family's background. We have dairy farmers and hog farmers. They all grow corn and beans. Everybody on my dad's side of the family, that's what they do for a living. So, it is literally, the way I look at this is you've got family farmers that we really have an ag-driven economy, not just in our congressional district, but in our state. Mm-hmm. And I hear from too many of them who are concerned about whether they're going to be able to pass along their family farm to the next generation, or even if they want to. This is just kind of like where you take a look at our global economy and what it means at a local level, from the pandemic to economic security to climate change to trade to ag. All of it is impacted by the global economy. And just very quickly, in the last year, I think if there's anything that we've learned, it's that that global leadership is about relationship building. I believe it's about playing a long-term game rather than knee-jerk reactions, choosing to look to past today and look at what we're going to do and invest in tomorrow. I think that is what the Biden administration is bringing to the equation right now, or at least what they're trying to do. We've all struggled through this pandemic. As you said at the outset, Jason, we wish we could all be in person. But in our state alone, we've lost more than 22,000 lives at this point. And, our economy's just taken a huge hit. So I would say, though, if I'm to summarize looking ahead, I'm very encouraged by President Biden, and his first 100 days will be here on April 29th. So it is literally just around the corner, just a couple weeks away. And the American Rescue Plan that we've already passed. Now we're talking about the jobs plan that will be about rebuilding our country. And so it's a matter of fighting COVID, rebuilding the Build Back Better. I'll go ahead and use that phrase, and making sure that we get this in the right place. So with that, again, thank you for the opportunity. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, and really looking forward to answering any questions and offering any other context that could be helpful to you.
Us too. Some great opening remarks for us to help kick off our conversation today. A lot of food for thought already, and really look forward to the conversation and following up on that. And a great reminder for your constituents watching today of how fortunate they are to have someone representing them from Illinois in the Houses of Congress too, of how a great job you're doing there and summing up all those issues. Why don't we start today's conversation with something we both referred to, and that's on COVID-19, America's role in the global response, why it matters to our interests and values. And before turning to some, we're going to tackle some of these other critical issues and then turn to some questions from some USGLC state leaders here in Illinois. Why don't we start off to you, Congresswoman? Last month, USGLC released a new report called A Roadmap to U.S. Global Leadership, highlighting areas of bipartisan consensus when it comes to America's role in the world. And our analysis of over, as you can see there on the screen, of over 100 reports from leading policy institutes across the political spectrum found clear consensus that diplomacy, development are key solutions in U.S. efforts to tackle global challenges, including the COVID-19 pandemic. You have a background working in healthcare, of course, and you understand firsthand how important it is that we have strong health systems, both at home and around the world. And as we continue to address the urgent domestic challenges of this crisis, can you tell us why it's also in our interest to combat this pandemic overseas, to be on the offense, including supporting the equitable distribution of vaccines in the developing world?
Whether it's overseas or even in our own country, I think if there's anything that we've learned is that with a virus like this, there's no respect for any borders.
No.
Absolutely none. This was the COVID-19 was by no means the first virus to hit our shores from overseas. But there's so much that we can learn from this. It's shown us that in today's intercontinental world, that a disease threat anywhere can be a health threat everywhere.
That's right.
That is exactly what we are living through right now. We know that this virus exploits even the smallest gap, and will get in there and will spread and will grow. And when we're not prepared, it's a problem. I know with this is a bipartisan or nonpartisan conversation, but there was a problem with disbanding the Global Health Security and Biodefense Unit at the National Security Council. And I was, like probably many people, just stunned that there was a decision to withdraw from the World Health Organization. And in the middle of a pandemic. So, we've seen, I just finished reading the Bob Woodward book. It probably depends on your politics a little bit as to whether you want to read it. It's the book called Rage. But as a former journalist, it's where I spent 17 years of my career as a journalist, another 10 years in healthcare. But I just have a great appreciation for an investigative reporter who has on the record conversations. But it's really a very interesting breakdown about this very topic, Jason, about something that President Trump did that I will applaud, that was somewhat controversial at the time, but when he said that we can't have flights coming in from China.
Sure.
But what ended up happening was, while Wuhan was completely shut down, what happened was internally it was shut down, but people were still flying to European nations. And then after flying to European nations, they were flying to America.
Right.
So, so this is just an example of, how we could see that with ease and with speed of global travel, along with a rapidly expanding commerce and trade, that that is why it is so important when we look at this vaccination process now, that we as Americans play a role in making sure that the world can get vaccinated. And I know that, there's a long, long way to go. We are so far away from having any kind of herd immunity in our own country, but we are getting to I have visited a number of the community vaccination sites. What we're hearing from people is that sometimes it's hard to get all of those slots filled right now. So we've got to make sure that we are part of the solution on a worldwide level, not just in our own nation.
So true. And we're talking about those direct health effects on Americans and on the rest of the world. There's an economic event that's happening from this as well. The International Monetary Fund estimates that the COVID-19 pandemic will cost the global economy an astounding $28 trillion in lost output through 2025. And just in comparison, global health experts have called for additional investments of just $4.5 billion a year to bolster preparedness and prevent future outbreaks. I mean, it's a lot of money we're talking about, but we're talking about 28 trillion lost economy, 4.5 billion to bolster preparedness. When you think about it, we could have spent billions to save trillions in this effect of this pandemic overall. Or, the at home parallel is the more you spend a little bit on diet, exercise, preventative medicine to stop the expensive corrective surgery down the line too. And as you said, COVID-19 hasn't been, nor will it be, the last pandemic we'll face. So I guess to tie that all together, what are the consequences if we turn our attention away from global health security now, as we're seeing the end of this, hopefully, pandemic here at home, but the cost that of future preparedness efforts once this pandemic ends?
Yeah, I think it gets back to what we just talked about, and really the most effective and cost-effective way to protect Americans, or again, you look at any nation now in the world, but the best way to protect our citizens from the known and the unknown health threats that begin someplace else is to stop them before they spread.
Right, right.
And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the global the plan to protect Americans from major health threats in the past, like if you look at Ebola,
Sure.
or you look at Zika, the idea there, and actually we did a pretty good job if you look at that. But it's detecting and controlling outbreaks at their source. And you do that, and it saves lives, it reduces healthcare costs. And that's really the CDC can play a very, very important role in that. The World Health Organization can play a very, very important role in that. The CDC helps other countries do things like build capacity to prevent, to detect, to respond to health threats. And the goal really, again, is to stop the diseases where they occur as soon as they start. And again, this has been, I think when we do a deeper dive, and I think there's still going to be a lot of information that comes out about the start of COVID-19 and what could have been done differently. But we'll have to learn from the lessons on this one and make sure that we don't ignore those as we move forward, because there's just too much at stake. To your point, and actually, I did not know that $28 trillion figure. It is. It's
But
absolutely
not
stunning.
surprising though, when you think about, when you've seen what it's done here, you just multiply that across the world right now where it's happened. And it's not shocking to think that the devastation this has happened and the setback that's happened economically.
Right, and unsustainable. So to your point about investing billions to save trillions, you're exactly right. And I really do hope that under our leadership that we have now, that we're not going to make knee-jerk decisions that we've unfortunately seen that led up to this pandemic.
And the thing is, it's not our responsibility to do this alone. This isn't our burden alone. This is about burden sharing and cooperative efforts, and investing some of our expertise, some of our resources, as you talked about, our public health expertise, our diplomats at the State Department on the front lines out there to be able to identify and understand, gather intel with their partners, our health experts at USAID, all of these different civilian experts that our Illinois State Advisory Committee of USGLC understands, promotes, and puts out there. But it's always a reminder that it's not ours alone to do, because we can't solve it alone. It's in partnership, it's sharing information, best practices, and building that long-term infrastructure so we have better warning systems and are able to try and contain, prevent at the outset before it rages into this $28 trillion disaster that we face today.
It's not sustainable.
No, it is not.
I mean, we've got to be smart up front. Yeah.
So we talked economic health. There's a national security element to this as well. And one of the biggest challenges that we see for, as we talked about in our opening, there's 200 retired 3- and 4-star generals and admirals, and our 30,000 veterans from across the country, part of this unique network. They really recognize the biggest challenges that we have is rising conflict around the world and strait fragility. It's something that's only been worsened by the pandemic. I got a figure here that by 2030, a quarter of the world's population, 2.2 billion people, will be living in either fragile or conflict-affected countries. You're a member of Defense and Probe Subcommittee of Congress. You traveled to the Middle East. You've seen challenges provided and posed by fragile states. How worried are you about the destabilizing impacts on the security side right now, this pandemic, in already fragile regions? And what's our role in our civilian tools, again, complementing our brave military and effective military in supporting conflict prevention, peace building, to making sure that in an already fragile landscape out there, this pandemic isn't the last thing to push fragile states into failed states, and they require even more of an expensive and risky intervention on the part of the United States.
Yeah, thank God for our men and women in uniform. And, when I do travel around the world, something that we like to do, we call them CODELs. I think probably a lot of your folks on this know what a CODEL is, but basically it always, it's bipartisan. You have Democrats and Republicans traveling together, but we almost always on the trips that I've taken, we've tried to make sure that we talk with our men and women in uniform. And I always look for those from Illinois. I always like to find that local connection. But to your question, I think ensuring a robust and an equitable recovery across the globe is essential to our national security. You noted the fragile regions are especially susceptible to the effects of the coronavirus, but not only in terms of public health, but in terms of economic growth and promotion of democracy. When you have these already fragile nations facing hardships like the ones that we were seeing from the pandemic, it opens up opportunities for authoritarian governments in places like Russia and China to continue to build out their power and play a larger role in global development, while it's undermining our democratic values.
Yeah.
And so it is really why our country, we have to use our civilian tools that are available to us through the State Department. You mentioned USAID, the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Yes.
You as you introduced me, I've been on the Ag Committee. I'm in my 5th term right now, and I've been on it since my very first term. There are some tremendous opportunities through USDA and other federal entities to make sure that we ensure that these fragile nations have the resources that they need so they can build and they can maintain stronger economies and stronger democracies. So, that we aren't faced with larger challenges down the road. I think this part of the conversation fits in perfectly with what we're talking about, a pandemic. Invest now, and plan for the long term, because it is worth it.
So true. And you make a great point too, that when we think of fragile countries, it's not only fragile, when it comes to food security or health systems, or raging sometimes military armed conflict, but democracies can be fragile too. And pandemics have a way of putting challenges on governments, bolstering sometimes authoritarian ones, undermining democratic ones, trying to make the best decisions. And that's another angle to this. And that's a unique, again, role that our diplomats and development experts and pushing forward for that, for the best possible practices out there. And, withstanding this storm in so many ways of this pandemic is making sure we don't lose good governance around the world that then has generations to reset in the future too. And it's, I really appreciate you bringing up that part of the fragile state equation when we think of not just conflict and food security and other things. But you also read my mind on talking about agriculture and the economy and the Illinois economy, just in your last point too, because I want to turn to that part of this angle too on the global economy. Look, I mean, COVID-19 has upended business for companies in Illinois, around the country, when it comes to exports. And that's a big deal. I mean, you talked about the complexity and the challenges, obviously, of your state and your district working in the global economy. But on the positive side, you have 1.5 million Illinois jobs supported by international exports each year. And Illinois economy, it's really bolstered by that. Companies like John Deere, close to your heart, close to your district, these exports reach all over the world. Between 2007 and 2017, Illinois agricultural exports to developing countries increased by over 116%. But, we found again on a study about, you don't have vaccines distributed around the world. The global economy could lose that 9 trillion upcoming, and hitting developing countries really hard. So at a point where we've got to get our economy roaring again, getting our farm exports back out into the system in these markets, those are countries that are still reeling from the pandemic and unable to make the purchases that we need to. So I guess that's tying into how can American programs that assist other countries, ultimately help Illinois recover from the economic impacts of the pandemic, creating new opportunities to help feed the world, reach new markets, and how do these efforts to help more stable societies abroad become our customers of tomorrow too for Illinois' exports?
Well, so not only is John Deere near and dear to my heart, it is literally, so I told you the Mississippi River is my front yard. If I went about a mile to my right when I'm looking out my front door, that's where the combines are built. It's called Harvester Works in East Moline, Illinois. East Moline was where I served on a city council before coming to Congress. But so it is more than just near and dear to my heart, and it also provided a livelihood. It is right outside my front door. It provided a livelihood for my father-in-law and my brother-in-law. It's critical to our local farmers as well. But so let's talk about the ag sector to follow up on your question. But the local growers and producers, and by the way, I just finished. We have 13 farm bureaus in the congressional district I serve. We have 14 counties and 13 farm bureaus, and I just finished my 13th Zoom roundtable with our local family farmers. And they're talking about just how difficult it's been to keep their operations going during these, up and down trade conditions, to the point where, what I said earlier, they're wondering about, are they going to be able to pass their family farm along to the next generation? Do they want to pass it along? But you've got, let's look at some of the programs though that are so important. You've got global agricultural programs like the Food for Peace program.
Yeah, 480.
McGovern-Dole, they help our farmers at home while providing the much needed aid abroad. So, I mean, they're like, the cliche win-win, they're win-wins. And it's through programs like this where, I think you all know this, but the federal government buys the food from our farmers, and including those in the congressional district that I serve. So it can be distributed, the food can be distributed abroad through USAID and the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service. And it's a great source of revenue for our farmers, especially when they've been faced with these turbulent trade conditions, and not to mention what's going on with climate change as well. But in the Food for Peace program, you've got high quality American commodities that are packaged in boxes with the American flag on them, and they say from the American people. And you think about just how important it is for those who are getting these food boxes to know that it's American people who were there for them in their time of need. And maybe some people say, well, that's marketing or propaganda. That is what we need to be doing. So that's building those relationships. McGovern-Dole, they're delivering commodities to schools in high need regions abroad. And, we all know, if you think about, we have way too many kids in our own country who aren't well nourished. But, you think about, put yourself back into those days when you were in school, and you think about, you can't get a good education if you're experiencing chronic hunger. And so having well-nourished, well-educated kids is just incredibly important as far as building those strong, lasting relationships and democracies abroad. The American Rescue Plan, it included $800 million in emergency funding for the Food for Peace program. And I think that's worth noting as part of this conversation and the commitment that we have to this.
What an example, as you said, just doing right by America's farmers and farmers of Illinois, but also about a powerful symbol of diplomacy, for that citizen diplomacy that we have of doing the right thing abroad to, from this pandemic and just ongoing other conflict and climate shifts and everything else that cause food insecurity. And food insecurity as your time both on your national security expertise in Congress and the ag and the food side, knowing that overlap, you start overlaying food insecurity in Africa, in the developing world, and where you see the potential rise of violent extremism, of just instability. There's that, a mapping that really overlaps on where you see that, because food insecurity is a bad thing overall for countries, for people, and for us to be part of that solution with the best of American products going out there is such a win-win, as you said. The best of us and the best of our image abroad, and is really cool. So appreciate your leadership on the committee too, to continue our positive and impactful investments in Food for Peace and McGovern Dole's International School Lunch Program. All really cool. Economic parts of this are great, but there's also still about our values as Americans too, that we at USGLC and your constituents in Illinois talk about, and our leaders in our Illinois State Advisory Committee. 80 million people right now figure displaced around the world. More than 235 million people will need humanitarian assistance this year. That's an estimated, from experts, 40% increase just from last year. One of the areas that COVID-19 has most significantly disrupted here at home, but also abroad, is education, and international education as well. World Bank estimates that the generation of students could lose an estimated 10 trillion in earnings, another $1 trillion at the scale of this in earnings as a result of learning loss, higher dropout rates. You've been a strong supporter of international education assistance and for our own educational and cultural exchange programs that bring visitors and their dollars here to the United States. Why are these investments that we make in the next generation of leaders in the world not only the right thing to do, but also a smart thing for us in the long term?
Well, so yeah, let's talk about that support. So Senator Durbin and I, we have a bill. He has it in the Senate. I have it in the House, and it's called the Senator Paul Simon Study Abroad Program.
Great, man.
And now it's a bill that I think I've been introducing it for, this isn't necessarily good, but maybe at least the last 3 terms. This might be the 4th term that I've introduced this. Now you talk about something that's near and dear to my heart. So for folks on the Zoom here, hopefully some recognize the name Paul Simon. But he was this ultimate champion for cultural exchange programs and for education worldwide. But on a personal level, my father, a guy named Gene Callahan, he passed away in 2014, but my dad was Paul Simon's chief of staff when Paul was in state government, when Paul was the lieutenant governor. And so, I knew Paul pretty much my whole life growing up. And so his son, Martin Simon, this is his pet project. And so we've been working on this together, but basically it incentivizes colleges and universities to make study abroad a key part of higher education, with the goal of eventually having 1 million college students studying abroad every single year for credit. And, so just incredibly important. It's this whole conversation, we are a global economy. We are, everything is intertwined, and it's so important for our college students here in our country to have this solid understanding of other cultures and value systems, so that they have the tools to engage in things like business abroad as they get through their education. And it's so important for young people abroad to meet and interact with our American college students firsthand. So I said when we first started this out about relationships, and this is about interpersonal connections that can help paint a very different picture of Americans than how they can be portrayed in media or broader society. So really, again, something that could just be so beneficial. I'm hoping that we don't just introduce this again, but with a different makeup here in Washington, D.C. I'm really hoping that we can make some progress with this legislation.
The stakes are so high with it too, as you said, and this is follows on the last question too about how America defines itself on the world stage. As we have our diplomats, we have our presidents and top leaders who go around, or secretaries of state, but this opportunity for cultural and educational diplomacy of bringing students from abroad, having them learn in our universities. There's an economic contribution to those towns and everything, and the universities themselves, like our export. We have this remarkable, second to none higher education system that brings the best and the brightest from abroad as well. And we forward and their perspective on what America is, what Illinois is when they go back. Those are lifelong connections that are done. They're personal, they're about our country. So when we have a crisis later on, those are the future leaders of those countries going back there as well. And they've had that direct contact with America that isn't formed through Hollywood or some other or other of our corporations necessarily in those perspectives, but one-on-one with Americans and families and students and everything. So when we have crises down the line, that leader who had that experience here, that's someone we're going to be able to call on more likely, or forge something along another partnership too, that is really unique and such an important part, unseen part and benefit of these exchanges.
That's right. Absolutely.
And-
You know, I still remember, that this wasn't a college program, but I still remember Sean McGinnis out of 7th grade. He was an exchange student. And we were just all fascinated with him. Like we asked question after question after question after question. Like we just wanted to understand. He was from England, and we just wanted to understand his way of life. Why was his handwriting so nice? Why in 7th grade was he, as a guy from England, how could he speak French so well? I mean, it was just, you just think about, and that was like in these formative years when I was in junior high, and you think about, this college program that we're talking about through the Paul Simon Study Abroad Act. It's just very, very important for these relationships.
And your late father working for Paul Simon, did he ever wear a bow tie? Was there one day of a week where he had to wear or only the boss wore the bow tie?
Really quickly. Paul Simon actually lived with my family. So the point about the bow tie, if you know the Odd Couple, the Felix and Oscar character, Felix was the one all buttoned down, all fancy and everything. Sure. That was Paul Simon. And my dad was Oscar, short sleeves, with a tie, not a jacket, always stains on his tie or his top. But it was, really, I think about Paul Simon very, very lovingly. But he and my dad were literally like Felix and Oscar, but
not on the same bow tie circuit, basically.
No, not on the same bow tie circuit.
What a lovely memory, though, too, and
yes,
and great legacy. Paul Simon on education, but also water, of course. What a leader he was in so many ways. Hey, we love talking to you so far. We've got some members of our Illinois State Advisory Committee to come on board as well. And would love to call on Sylvia Bonilla first of the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Go ahead, Sylvia, with your question for the Congresswoman today. Great to have you join us too. Thank you.
Thank you for this amazing event. I really appreciate it, and I'm learning a lot. So my name is Sylvia Bonilla. I'm the director of the Illinois Small Business Development Center at the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And I work with hundreds of businesses every year. And as we all know, small businesses are the real engine of the economy, and they are essential, critical to our recovery, making up 90% of all of Illinois' exporting companies. So Congresswoman Bustos, you have been a great champion when it comes to our development agencies that support Illinois companies that want to do businesses overseas, such as the Export-Import Bank. So my question for you is, can you please share why you see these programs as so important to supporting our economy? And also, how can more Illinois small businesses be part of programs like this? Thank you.
Well, Sylvia, it is very nice to meet you. So let me say thank you for helping our small businesses on the ground. I mean, it's, I can't even imagine being in your job right now. It's just, everything just has to be so tremendously difficult for just small business owner after small business owner. And, it really is people like you who help our local economies get back on track. So thank you. So to your point, when small businesses look to grow, what do? They look to new markets. right? That you always have to grow your customer base, whatever that customer base may be. And that can be, it might be adding a new product line, or it might be looking abroad to export markets. And it's why it is so critical to have the infrastructure to help facilitate business growth, especially when exploring the international market. So you mentioned the Export-Import Bank. They do great work on this front, including small business guides for first-time exporters, financing options, and more. I've got a piece of legislation that makes sure that the small business export centers, that they do more outreach. We were just successful. Rockford is in the northern part of my congressional district, and they have the position for the export assistance centers has not been filled for years. And small businesses need that. If you're gonna grow your markets, you gotta have someone who's gonna be there to help. So we've just been successful, learned that now they have a job posting to fill that. So if there's anybody on this call who wants to get involved in something like that, there is a job opening in Rockford at the Export Assistance Center. But it is things like that under the Small Business Administration that can make a tremendous difference in making sure that especially like first-time exporters can find new markets abroad. Thank you for your question.
Great. This is, great stuff too. And we were talking earlier about education, and we're really blessed to have, an important Illinois leader, Julie Schmidt from Judson University. I think to continue that conversation too on education and the international connections we have here in Illinois with the rest of the world. So Julie, over to you to continue our conversation on that subject.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm the director of the World Leaders Forum at Judson University, and that's a program that brings global leaders to our school and the community to educate and inspire our students about the world around them. And as you have mentioned, international connections are so important. However, international student numbers have faced serious decline as a result of the pandemic and falling global travel. So why is it so important that we continue to encourage international visitors to come to the US and particularly Illinois schools after the pandemic ends?
Well, just that international education is critical to our institutions of higher education. Not only do these programs help bolster regional economies, but they also provide international students a chance to interact with American students, again, to the point we made earlier, building those long-term relationships, get acquainted with what our culture is all about. And that cultural exchange is so important as to how we bring up the new generation of leaders, getting to know each other, developing those relationships, the personal relationships, the cultural relationships. In the congressional district that I serve in Rock Island County, you're familiar with Augustana College. I try to go and meet with the international students. And I've done that several times there, but and we do it very informally. We sit in the coffee shop, or sit around a small round table and just have a conversation. And there, it helps me. I think hopefully they learn a little bit about how Congress works. But again, it's incredibly important. And thank you for what you're doing. I know that as a college student, whenever we had guests who would come in and present, those were always highlights for me, because again, as a former journalist, like I never ran out of questions. I always have this sense of wonderment. So I think it's great what you're doing, and thank you for that. And it can't be stressed at all lightly, the importance of something like what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie, thanks for joining us today too. I really appreciate it. And thanks for your leadership at Judson also. Maybe it's been a great talk so far. Should we stay on time? Maybe a couple more questions, and then we can make sure we don't go into your vote window. So we still have time to talk. It's been great so far. I got a question on climate change. Another looming national security crisis, something that unfortunately can't be solved by our military alone, and that's climate change. By 2050, 143 million people could be displaced from their homes by climate-driven disasters. It's an issue that rural communities in particular know well. Temperatures on the rise, droughts lasting longer. There's a question actually in the chat from your constituent Anthony asking what changes are planned for agriculture to positively impact climate change. And I have another question kind of on how US and our international partners can do, again, in partnership to address this crisis, especially in vulnerable communities in the developing world who really feel the impacts of extreme climate.
Yeah, well, let me start with the ag part of it. And then there are a few other thoughts that I have as well. I would say the underlying foundation of what you're going to see in ag policy, what you're going to see in this infrastructure bill that we are beginning to negotiate, that will be the largest infrastructure bill in the history of our nation. There's going to be a climate, a climate undercurrent. So like, for instance, in agriculture, if you're following the topic at all, there's Secretary Vilsack is talking about a carbon bank. I am chair of the General Farm Commodities and Risk Management. It's a really fun name. Subcommittee.
Write that down.
of the Ag Committee. And this is where we are going to be looking at this. How does a carbon bank look? In agriculture, we have things like cover crops. We have things like where basically you can have a perimeter around where you plant that can help with runoff and that sort of thing. Last congressional session, I wrote something called the Rural Green Partnership. And the reason I did that is because there are a lot of climate conversations that have been out there. And if you go back a couple of years and you noticed when some of the more high profile climate proposals were out there, there was a big gap in addressing the middle part of our country, or addressing the ag economy, or even having growers and producers with a seat at the table. So I quickly recognized that, hey, first of all, it never feels good if you have the finger pointed at you as always being part of the problem. And so we wrote what's called the Rural Green Partnership. I am happy, Jason, I can send that to you and you can get it out to anybody.
We would happily send it to yours.
I know Heather is on this call. Heather from my staff. I will have Heather get that to you. But
thank you.
Basically, the idea is that it expands the USDA conservation programs. It increases incentives for energy storage and renewable development. It expands things like high-speed broadband and fosters green workforce programs and unions, registered apprenticeships, things like that as part of the Rural Green Partnerships. Yeah. So, but I think what you're going to see under the Biden administration is climate will be the underlying foundation for so much of the policy that it will be negotiated. I think it was a very important first step to see the Biden administration formally re-enter the Paris Climate Agreement. Mm-hmm. And, it stipulates that developed countries like the United States and our European allies, that we take the lead in providing financial assistance to poorer and more vulnerable countries. I think that is incredibly important as well. So those are just a couple of the thoughts, but I would say stay tuned to when we are debating these major policies. You've already heard about building out the electric vehicle stations. 500,000 of those are part of the infrastructure package. So, I think you're just going to start hearing more and more of that. Right before getting on this call, I was on a call with Energy Secretary Granholm, and specifically asked about rural America, specifically asked about biofuels, because like in the congressional district I serve, we have 7 biofuels plants. It's probably one of the heaviest biofuels districts in the entire country. And so, as we look at more electric vehicles, you've got to have an interim strategy as far as how clean fuel burns. And we happen to think that biofuels can be a part of that.
You really look forward to getting more on the rural green partnerships. I mean, that's what a rural resilience agenda for them, from broadband to climate shocks to a whole bunch of looking at that, and rural America getting a seat at the table on the front lines. America's farmers are seeing what climate change can do to provide challenges in their work, and that voice for America, abroad as well, as we look for joint solutions.
That's right.
Really important, tying that local to global. That's so part of our organization too, at the heart of our organization. We could go on for a long time. This conversation has been great, but I got to respect your time and everyone else's, and just really thank you for this conversation. I want to close with one question to you. I mean, this has been kind of it can be a heavy topic sometimes. Talking about world challenges at a time of a pandemic is not always a walk through the park, and we had some heavy issues today. But I want to try and end on something on a positive note for you and your constituents today, and ask you, what keeps you going, what gives you hope during these uncertain times, that we can, finally rise the challenge of surmounting, getting over this pandemic, and looking to that next phase for America's next chapter and the world's next chapter after we finally get through this pandemic. What gives you hope at night and everything, and coming into work and casting those votes on behalf of the people of Illinois?
Yeah, I have just a tremendous amount of faith in this administration. I really do. Again, closing in on these first 100 days, the administration's assembled a team of smart experts in each of their respective fields. And, I think they will work well as a team. I'm also, I talked to you a little bit about my professional background, but I'm also a former college athlete. And I look at teams and how teams work together, and how important that is to have trust that, when you're going to throw the ball off to somebody, they're going to be able to catch it, they're going to be able to turn, and they're going to be able to shoot a jump shot. But this team will work well together. I have faith in that. And President Biden, he's a good man. He cares. And, I like it when he says Americans have the unique ability to lead, not by example of our power, but by the power of our example. And I think if, when you look at hope, I would end with President Biden's quote, because these are the times that we're living in right now. And I think that he nails it with that.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for your message of hope for our close. I know your constituents join me in just being impressed by the breadth of your understanding, the passion, the innovation you bring to your issues. And thank you for your time today. It's been a great discussion. I want to turn it on to my friend and colleague, Robert Watson, our Ohio Valley Director for USGLC, for our closing remarks and wrap up our program. And again, Congresswoman, best of luck to you going forward, and look forward to seeing you soon in person, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Jason. And thanks to everybody for tuning in today.
Robert.
Thanks, Jason. And thank you, Congresswoman Bustos, for having this conversation with us during what is really a pivotal time for our country. We appreciate your time. So thanks again. I'd also like to thank Julie and Sylvia for your questions earlier. We really appreciate your contributions to the USGLC and the Illinois Advisory Committee. And I'd like to thank our advisory committee and our partners as well. We couldn't do this without you guys. So thank you so much for your support. It means a lot to have you on here. I know it's tough getting on Zoom and all that, but thanking your congressperson, sharing your perspective is really essential for advancing American global engagement and promoting our economic interests, our national security, and of course, our humanitarian values around the world. So your engagement on these issues really does make a lot of difference, and we look forward to working with you in the future. I'd also encourage you, as Jason mentioned at the beginning, to check out our report on reports, a recent release that highlights a bipartisan roadmap for U.S. leadership on today's most pressing global challenges. And you can download the full report at usglc.org. Please share the findings with your friends, talk about these things with your family. It's important to keep this conversation going. And so the more we can get that dialogue out in our community, the better. And it positively impacts our lives and our communities, of course. So For up-to-the-minute updates, make sure you're following us on Twitter, sign up for our mailing list, and of course, join our virtual events, for which there are many. And thanks again for your support. I enjoy hearing from all of you, so I'll be following up, and hopefully we can keep this conversation going. So thanks again for your time, and take care.